I will now call to order the City of Newberg Budget Committee meeting for May 14th, 2024. Rachel, will you please conduct a roll call?
Yes, I will. Shelley Reimer. Okay. Ned Knight.
Here.
Alex Nichols.
Here.
Ted Deborah.
Here.
Stephanie St. Cyr.
Here.
Raquel Peregrino de Brito.
Here.
Judy Brown.
Here.
Mayor Rosacker.
Here.
Molly Olson.
Here.
Derek Carmen.
Here.
And Peggy is an excused absence. Elise Yarnell Holloman.
Here.
And Mike McBride.
Here.
And Robin Whaley.
Here.
Thank you.
I will now open the meeting for public comments. All right. So let's go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, I will now turn it over to staff presentations on budget.
Thank you. So we're going to start on Fund 3, which is on page 69, the Civil Forfeiture Fund. Yeah.
It would be my favorite if it was bigger. I know.
Yeah. 69. So this fund holds all of our forfeiture money that we receive. And mostly, we're not expecting any new forfeiture next year. It's just mostly beginning fund balance and interest that's in the revenue. And then we've budgeted any of the expenses that we can pay out of professional services because there's specific rules as to what you can spend forfeiture money on. So again, it's not a lot of money, and that's what we've budgeted to spend. There's not a lot to this one. Do you guys have any questions on this fund?
So what has to happen in order to get some money or confiscate? So does it have to be a felony type of a crime, or how does it work?
Well, our forfeiture program used to be a lot more robust. I'm gonna date myself, over 20 years ago, it used to be a lot easier. And, you know, when drugs were illegal and, you know, making arrests, and we would confiscate proceeds and cash and that stuff. So the way the laws are written now, if it's a federal, if we're part of a federal task force, or not task force, sorry, part of a federal operation, then they do similar to what profit sharing, which is a lot better than what the state offers. Because if we seize $1, we only get to keep 40%. The other 60 goes to state programs. So it's very difficult to take assets from people, because then we're responsible for them. And then it costs you money to confiscate those things, and then you have to take care of them. So it's really it can be cost prohibitive to do that unless it's a federal case. Did I answer your question? And then, you know, obviously with the legalization of drugs, now that's swinging back a little bit. You know, good luck. That just wasn't going to happen. So we'll see what happens moving forward. I don't anticipate this account growing. I mean, the interest is huge. So I think we got that going for us, and that's about it. Yeah.
Yep. All right. We'll
No
move on
further
then.
questions. Go ahead.
So next one is going to be on page 71, the 911 tax fund. So this fund has revenue that comes from the state, which we receive as part of the state shared revenue, and that's for having a dispatch center that we manage. And so on here, just from the state projections that we received, it's going to be about a 4.5% increase in revenue from that distribution. And then the rest of it here is just miscellaneous fees that we receive. We have just a small master street address guide if we happen to get any of that in. And that's about it for the revenue. And then if you turn to page 72, this fund,
Can I ask a question before we get there?
Yeah, of course.
Just curious, back to this one on the top line, why does the working capital go down so much in the proposed budget?
so it varies because basically we try and fund the most expensive dispatchers we can out of this fund to preserve general fund dollars. So we try and kind of play a game to see, okay, we should move these dispatchers in to try and keep the fund balance. Right around 50,000 is, 50 to 80,000 is where we try and keep it.
Okay.
So it just depends. We've had some vacancies in the past year for dispatch, so that's why we had a little bit more of a fund balance in the past, but we're trying to use up this money and then leave the vacancies more in the general fund.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, the expenditures here that you see are funding 3 dispatch officers that we have. And then we have just the rest that goes into contingency for, just cost variations that happen over the years for funding dispatchers. Any questions on this fund?
Why did the salaries and wages go down?
So again, that varies based on the experienced ones we have in here. So we had to kind of move it around in order to keep about between the 50 and 80,000 in the contingency that we'd like to keep on hand.
Okay,
So we just usually play a game to see, okay, which dispatchers fall into that revenue category? Because everybody gets COLAs over the years and we've hired new people on. So it's usually we shift people around based on revenues that we have and staffing costs.
Any other questions? Move on.
All right, we'll move on to the public safety fee, which is going to start on page 74. So for this one, it has 2 different sets of revenue. It has the public safety fee fund, or the public safety fee that you get on your water bill, and then the communication officer fee that's also paid on your water bill. So you can see the 2 different revenues here. And those increase by resolution, and then those are by the CPIU index. So the public safety fee is linked to the CPIU West, which was going up 4.3%. And the communication officer fee is linked just to the general CPIU, which is 3.3%. So those increased by those amounts. And then for the expenditure portion on here, did you have a question on that?
where does Dundee's money come in? Where does it show up in the?
That's in the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah. For the requirements here, so we have patrol that funds 3 police officers. And then the communication portion funds 2 dispatchers. And then the rest we put in their respective reserve amounts. And again, we try and shuffle officers around to try and use up what we can of this fund and maintaining a certain level of reserves so that we can kind of preserve what we can on the general fund revenues. Any questions on this one?
So just a comment, so you move around to make sure that, because these funds can only be used for this, so that you
Exactly.
can fund as much as you can out of this fund, so that the general fund has more wiggle room for other things. So I just
Exactly.
want to make sure that
Yes.
that's understanding. Thank you.
And sometimes, a lot of our officers will advance, they'll get a certification and whatnot, so they'll move up the pay scale, and then they may be too expensive to fund 3 officers in this pool of money that we get.
And then you move them another one around
Yes.
here so that,
So that we can always make sure that we fund the 3 officers as promised by the resolution.
yes, go on.
So it may be that if we have a young officer, they would live in these pools until they became more senior. And then the other thing, to the mayor's question, page 13, the middle of the data table, that shows where the money comes in from Dundee for police.
Any other questions? move along.
All right. I think you're done.
I've talked way too much.
Okay, we'll move on to the building fund, which is on page 80. And Scott's going to join me for that. $80. So for the revenues in here, we have building permits. So we've kind of looked at what we've received this year regarding building permits and the mechanical permits. And so we've budgeted that same estimated revenue for next year because we're expecting it to be more flat. We're not expecting building and permits to continue to increase. We're expecting that to start to kind of plateau. So we budgeted the revenue consistent to what we've received this fiscal year. So you've seen a little bit of an increase on both of those lines, but that's consistent to what we've actually received this year. And then, do you want to do the expenditures?
Sure. Thank you, Katie. Good evening, members of the Budget Committee. Probably the most significant item that I'd point out under building requirements is also an expense that applies to planning, and that's for maintenance agreements. And that's for the new software. So we're launching a new permitting enterprise software that incorporates planning, building, and engineering, basically development services software, which you've heard about. And so you'll see an increase there. And I think I may have misspoken in your previous budget meeting, so I'll just correct myself. I had a question about maintenance agreements, and I was thinking, oh, that's developer refunding of developer guarantees. That's not what it is. So for the record, I'm correcting myself there. And in addition, well, internal services. So expenses are going up across the organization, and the building fund is responsible for that as well. So unless you had any questions about the building fund expenses, those are
And
probably the
this-
highlights. Yeah.
This last that you mentioned that changed, you're talking about the line 590000 that went from 209 to 249, right?
That's correct,
That's-
Chair. Yeah.
Thank you.
Software is 533045 maintenance agreements. And so that's increased from 13,300 to 22,200.
And that software is split between planning, building, engineering. I think that's it. But the engineering, it's split between 4 different account codes. So it's kind of divided among the departments who will be using it.
Will wants to talk.
Sorry, I just have to gush for a minute. So this is one of those customer service things that was called out that we needed. So engineering, building division, planning have spent many days working together, designing the flows for permitting that will be programmed into the new software to make each pathway as efficient as it can be with as little redundancy as possible for better customer service.
Yes,
And I-
Molly?
Oh, sorry, if I may, and Katie can correct me if I'm wrong, or Will can. There's a cost for deploying the software, and then there's the maintenance of the software. And so is it front loaded here for deployment? This includes?
No,
okay,
deployment will be in, the next fund.
Okay, thanks.
Just a comment, I believe that software will also allow people trying to understand where they are in the process to check it, which is also really good internally, right? So that it doesn't get stuck on someone's desk because you can see where it's on hold and where it's moving. That's really awesome.
Any further questions? Move along.
Okay, we'll move to page 84. For Fund 14, Economic Development. So again, for the revenues, the main stream of revenue, thank you, for this fund is the business licensing. And we're seeing just a little bit of an increase on that. So we kind of matched again the revenue, what we've seen this year. And so that's what we've budgeted again for next year. And then all of the other revenues are remaining consistent. You won't see the CDBG grant next year because we're expending that fully this fiscal year. And then again, the construction excise tax, we're not collecting any of that revenue anymore. So you won't see that next year either.
So for the record, we are no longer collecting a tax from, when there is, from this construction excise tax. It's something that we used to collect, and we are no longer collecting this tax.
Correct, that was sunsetted.
Great.
Okay, and if you have specific questions about the Economic Development Special Payments Fund, we have our planning manager, Clay Downing here, who's immersed in the program. I'll just say, sort of at a high level, the funding CET, as you had pointed out, Chair, is static at this point, and the council has directed staff to maintain a reserve of $1 million that would be directed toward a legacy project as it's been described. And so you're seeing, much of this in special payments is reserved for that. We do have certain obligations with the CET funds. There was, and we maintained the 4% administrative fee, which equates to about $62,000 that as the city was collecting construction excise taxes, it was assessing this fee, and that was intended to go toward paying for the operation for the program and overhead. We also have two different you think about a two-pronged fork. There are residential fees that were assessed on residential construction projects, and then those fees that were assessed against commercial and industrial projects. And there are different requirements for each of those. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we do have funding here for developer incentives generally, which could be more economic development targeted or could be targeted toward affordable housing. So as developer incentives, which amount to about 50% of the revenue that the city received on residential construction are for these developer incentives that are more broader in potential scope. And then we have approximately 35% of the revenue that was collected on residential projects is for developer incentives and affordable housing programs. So there is an intent there for a percentage of that funding to go towards affordable housing. And then 15% of the revenues the city collected, we are required to pay Oregon Housing Community Services Department, the state agency that administers housing programs in Oregon. That's on the residential side of the ledger. On the commercial side, 100% of that funding can be directed toward developer incentives and or affordable housing programs. So there's, I think, greater flexibility there. And so this is really a program that's sunsetting, if you will. And so you may not see this much funding. We don't believe that you'll see this much in the special payments fund going forward after this fiscal year, provided the city's successful in directing those resources to worthy projects.
So I guess I'll ask, just to clarify. So right now, our proposed budget has $988,000 that is going to be used as an incentive for affordable housing. Can you explain to me what that incentive would be? So for example, you give me an example of what would someone need to do to get some of that money, I guess, and
according to the Oregon statutes, and again, Mr. Downing can correct me if I'm wrong or add to the conversation, the funding is for affordable housing programs includes, but it says not limited to rent buy downs and subsidies for existing housing in order to retain naturally existing or existing affordable housing. Secondly, down payment assistance, foreclosure prevention assistance, and I believe land development and production of new housing units, but I'll defer to Mr. Downing for further inquiry on that.
And if I understand correctly, right now, we have this almost $1 million that is reserved for this, but moving forward next year, this will not be in place anymore, this amount, or is this something that will always, because let me step back here. So we just talked about how we are no longer charging the construction excise fee, right? But now we are going to give money for construction.
This is one-time, this is one-time
This is a
funding.
one-time.
Right, so
Got it.
you wouldn't want to direct it to any ongoing programs. It would be directed to one time.
So in the year of 2024, 2025, that's when people should come in and try to take advantage of this, and then it's
Yeah,
gone.
so the city would, and the city currently has what's called a notice of funding availability process underway, and it's solicited grant applications. Those come before the council. And a similar solicitation or procurement process would be used for dispersing the remaining funds. It would be a public process. The council would provide direction on the policy objectives that it's wanting to achieve.
And it's a directive from the state for the city to have this funding available, or,
No, the city opted into this program with the construction excise taxes, and the city opted out and is opted by repealing the tax.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do we know where or who might want to project to take this $1 million fund?
Not at this time. We haven't formally, we haven't released any requests for proposals or solicitation. That would be the time when we would understand who's interested and what types of projects it would put toward that. Under the current request for notice of funding, we have received proposals that have come before the Affordable Housing Commission and will be coming before the City Council for awards
And again,
early this summer.
it would have to fit, I don't want to use that, but I'm going to fit a mold of affordable housing. So say someone with a building company, right? They build houses for sale and they want to build houses that are larger, or to get this fund, it needs to be houses that are affordable for,
I think City Manager Worthy has some comments on this. Yeah, thank you.
Just want to use some of that good PSU money I've spent again. So one example of a thing that you might do, for example, is for one construction, the city might cover the system development charges with CET revenue. That's just one concrete example of the sort of thing you could do.
right, I know that they're not gonna come here and give, like, we're not gonna write a check for them to do that. This will be in the form of a service that will be provided, but I understand that. I'm just trying to make sure that there's an understanding of who can get it. Because say I buy some land and I wanna buy, I wanna build 2 houses and make them for rent. This construction needs to fit a mold, a whole gamut of criteria to be able to be called affordable housing. So I want to make sure that there's an understanding that it's not going to be any construction that will get this money. That is not going to be anyone who can come into this pool and get this discount. Again, the city's not writing a check. They're just going to give services in lieu of this construction being affordable, right?
That's correct. And there are definitions and criteria that are provided by Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, the state, and the city has criteria that it has developed around awarding grants and loans for this purpose. And there are financial controls and project controls on the grants that the city awards, so that there's performance.
Molly?
I just say there's a whole process and another team that manages this. It's not really the budget committee. It's good to get educated on it, but there are a lot of rules around using this money. So there's a whole team that works that and then brings it to council. So
Yeah, and that's the reason why I'm bringing it up, because we're talking about something that went from 182 to 9, so I think it's important for us to understand all of that. So thank you for your answers.
I have another question. I'm on that committee and I have heard rumors that it's already been thought of and where it's going to head towards. And so that's my concern. And so if that's not true, then I guess that's what and it sounds like you said that it hasn't been thought through or it doesn't have, already planned where that dollars are gonna go to.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of chatter in the community and we hope that people are paying attention to this and are beginning to think about projects, although it's too early to really, formulate something because the city hasn't developed the criteria for this final tranche of funds. And as a member of the Affordable Housing Commission, you'll be at the table and that'll be coming before the commission. Yeah.
All right, if no further questions, carry on.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's move to page 141. We'll talk about the TLT fund. Yeah. So for TLT, we had, it looks like a large increase here for the hotel TLT revenue that we get. We've had a supplemental budget since then for that adopted column. So it's not as much of a drastic increase from this fiscal year to next year, but we are still expecting TLT to continue to go up because the past several years, TLT has continued to increase. So we're expecting that still to continue to go up, probably about the same amount that it's been going up the past 2 to 3 years. And then, again, for it's for the short-term rentals. Sorry, I was based on that. We're seeing a big increase on that. It went from 70,000 to 171,000. And that's just based on what we're seeing from our current revenue. So we kind of trued it up more to what we're actually seeing on the short-term rental income that we were getting. And then again, on page 142, for our materials and services, again, the visitor center gets 45,000, and then Visit Newberg gets the other portion of whatever revenue we receive in, because it has a percentage based, so that we get to keep a percentage and then they get the rest of the percentage.
And I'm sorry, remind me again where that percentage came from, it's just so that everybody knows. I know that some kind of contract, some kind of charter. Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, we were
about-
grandfathered in when we established the tourism program here and the TLT. So mostly if you have the TLT now, it's a much lower percentage that can go into the general fund and more has to stay with TLT revenue. But because we were grandfathered into a certain era for the code from the Oregon legislature, we have a different percentage split for TLT. Yeah, it's much higher. Yeah.
No, I'm just, so.
Yeah,
from
it's set by the
So
state.
So the state tell us that we need to use this revenue to promote the city, right?
Yes.
And tell me the story of how is it that Visit Newberg got the contract, I guess I'm trying to understand. Was it like a bid selection, or does anybody know the history of that?
Yeah.
We were not here then. I do not know.
Yeah, please tell us.
That was like right when I came in, and it was a TLT committee, so their transit lodging committee, and it was comprised of business owners and people I remember for sure were Dennis Lewis, Rob Felton at George Fox, Lonnie Parrish. There was a group, John Bridges, there was a group of folks that got together for almost over a year. It took a long, long time. And then Taste Newberg was a destination marketing organization that kind of branched off from that. And it was a community-based effort of forming that. And there was conversation at the time, I won't get into a personal opinion about this, but there was conversation at the time of whether it should be under the Chamber of Commerce, and whether it should be separated. Visit McMinnville is separate. And so we met with Visit McMinnville a number of times to kind of learn from them. They're further ahead in their development than we are, but Taste Newberg has done a really great job in the last couple of years of really furthering their work. And so, yeah, But it was a long, it was a long process of a lot of amended charters and bylaws and all that. So
Thank
that
you for
was been 2018.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I just wanted to give a background on, for the community,
Yeah.
for them to understand where this money went, how it was selected, and, you know, I agree with you. They do a great job.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions on TLT?
Is this where the Airbnb
Yes,
taxes?
yes.
And then that's still collected by honor system?
Yes, we do have a better tracking. We're trying to be more proactive about tracking them, but yeah, it is still somewhat of an honor system about if they set up an Airbnb, you know, they need to be telling us, but we are trying to do a lot more of research on our end of, hey, we think this is an Airbnb, and then we go contact them and try and collect our fees from that. Because more and more are popping up around Newberg. Yeah.
We had an ad hoc committee, which has completed their work. They worked with staff, Clay and his staff, to create a program that is not based on the honor system, so that we can actually track who's in there, put a limit on the total number of rentals, and make sure that the companies like Airbnb are responsible for paying us the tax, so we have somebody to go after if they don't do it.
Any more questions on TLT?
You mean budget question?
But yeah, well, you know, okay, carry on.
All right, we'll move on to the next page, 143, which is the Governmental Capital Projects Fund. So this one has just kind of been hanging out. So this fund was established for the public safety communication upgrade, which was the upgrade we did to the dispatch center several years ago. And we're still waiting for the final payments to come through. We believe we're making some progress on that, but every year we say that and then it never happens. So we're hoping next fiscal year we'll finally make the final payments and we'll be able to close this fund out for this project. So that's all this money is left over from relating to that upgrade. Oh, did you have a
Yes.
question, Mike?
Do we get to keep the interest while they don't want us to pay our bill?
So that's a question I have to talk to our bond counsel about because I believe some of this was from bond proceeds, so anything that's left over from this, I think we have to give back to them. But for now, it just sits in a fund. That's why we don't have any interest accruing on this fund for this money. So it just sits until we finish the final payment on the dispatch center. But we've been trying to close it out ever since I've been here. So it's trying to get the invoices going, but we believe we're probably going to close it next fiscal year finally, so.
Yes?
So who are we waiting to get an invoice from?
Motorola.
Why wouldn't they want their money? Why aren't they?
Uh,
Have we, maybe they forgot about it. Have we actually got a hold of them and
Yeah, we
said,
just talked to him today.
oh, did you? Okay.
Yes. There was movement on it today. That's why I say we think we're gonna close it.
Yeah, okay. So our portion, I can't remember, we entered into an agreement with WACA, C800, which is Clackamas County, and then Newberg. So that's how we end up with Newcom instead of Newberg Dispatch Center. Our portion was around, is it 3.2 or 3.5 million, something there. So this is that's the balance that we have left. And I think there were some lawsuits, nothing we did, but just in construction and whether or not they use Davis-Bacon wages and those types of things. So I think it's been tied up a little bit in litigation. So I'm not sure exactly. And we think, we think we're gonna be under budget. So it's really, we honestly have been trying to like pay this off for the last 2, maybe 3, but definitely the last 2 years. And we just made some headway like hours before this meeting. So we think it's going to be around 106,000 that we owe. That seems to be, and it changes, unfortunately. But, and then they said, well, just hang on to a little extra in case there's some cost overruns. We haven't done anything on this project in 3 years, or 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So, anyway, hopefully that gives you a little bit of light. Our portion was only like 3.2 or 3 point only, excuse me, that's a big number, but, the others were, I think, in the 50s to $70 million era, or area. So we only have a small portion.
Any questions, comments? Move along.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, the last fund we have to cover is on page 145. It's ARPA. And then, for the revenues, it's just beginning fund balance. It's carryover money we have left for the few remaining projects we have, which you'll see budgeted on page 146. Under economic development for general government, I think we have just 2 of the community projects left that need to be closed out. And then the rest of it for the public works was given for the water plant, which that's not happening. So I think we're repurposing that for the covers for the water plant that we have to do. And we're hoping the water rights is going to happen this fiscal year. It should be happening the very end of June. So I'm hoping to get that payment out so that I don't have to do a supplemental budget and fix it for next year. But we're hoping to have that all done, and that's all that's left for ARPA.
Will?
Sorry. And we have received the communication that the titling documents are inbound for the water rights.
Mhm.
So that is really, really close, and we think it's gonna happen this financial
Yeah.
year.
All righty.
And that is it for the budget presentation. I know.
Thank you so much for your hard work on presenting this.
Oh, thank you.
So, just a second. So now, I will now open the public hearing on the use of the state revenue sharing. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to submit testimony concerning the possible uses of the state revenue sharing funds for fiscal year 24-25 or 2024-2025. Are there any declaration of conflicts? Okay, hearing none, I will now turn it over to Katie for staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you put our, the flyer up for the state shared revenue? It was in the packet. But everybody does have the handout of it. So the purpose of this is just to discuss where we get our state shared revenue and where we put it in the budget. So the main ones, the liquor tax, which we have as the state shared revenue, and then we also have our separate liquor tax. And then we have the cigarette tax, the marijuana tax. Those are all budgeted in the general fund. And then we receive the gas tax, which is budgeted in the street fund. And then the 911 tax, which we receive for having a dispatch center, is budgeted in Fund 13. Does anybody have any questions around the state shared revenues? Yeah.
I'm just assuming that on the 911 tax, if we didn't have a dispatch center here, we wouldn't be getting anything. It just, we would still be paying it because we're all paying it.
Right.
Yeah.
We just wouldn't get any revenue.
Right.
If we didn't have a dispatch center.
Thank you. We talked about these as we were discussing
Yes.
the,
We're just required by
yes,
statute to do a public hearing about where those are located in the budget. And that's it.
understood. Rachel, are there any comments or public testimonies?
None were received.
I will now close the public hearing on the use of state state revenue sharing. Are there any recommendations from staff?
just that we approve the state shared revenues as presented in the budget.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that?
First, we have to have a motion. I would like to move that we approve this revenue sharing distribution that Katie just presented.
I second. Oh.
No,
Okay. So Molly moved, Mayor Bill seconded. Any discussion? All right, hearing no discussion, let's go ahead and move for a vote. All in favor to approve as presented?
Say aye. Roll call vote.
Okay. Okay.
All right, Shelley Reimer,
Aye.
Ned Knight,
Aye.
Alex Nichols.
Aye.
Ted DeBoer,
aye.
Steph St. Cyr,
Aye.
Raquel Peregrino de Brito,
Aye.
Judy Brown,
Aye.
Bill Rosacker.
Aye.
Molly Olson,
Aye.
Derek Carmen,
Aye.
Peggy Kohlberg is absent, Elise Yarnell Holloman,
Aye.
Mike McBride,
Aye.
and Robin Whately.
Aye.
Thank you. It passes unanimously.
Thank you so much. So now I will open the floor for general discussions on the budget. I'll go ahead and start. So,
Actually, Raquel, can you close the public hearing first?
okay, so
Sorry.
let me go ahead and close the public hearing. I'm calling it closed. Okay.
Have the fun.
Yeah, so now, I'm gonna open for discussion on the general budget before we, go ahead.
You looked like you wanted somebody to say something, and Bill will tell you that I will always say something. Kudos to the city and staff. You had a lot of climbing costs, and you've kept your spending flat in most areas, and that took a lot of good work, so I want to just say thank you. Good work, very innovative, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, I'll piggyback on that and, commend everyone who worked really hard to present this to us. I think this document is public, so anyone who wishes to look at it can totally get access to it by requesting to Rachel or just reaching out to the city of Newberg to get a copy of this. So on page 8, we have like an overview of the budget. And I don't know, Rachel, if you can pull that up for us to just, it has like a really quick snapshot of it. Page 8 and 9. So I can talk first about a little bit about the, the FTE summary where we have an actual reduced headcount, and so that tells me that you guys are running leaner and, and to my understanding, all positions are, have been staffed and that your team is doing a really great job to keep up with everything that needs to be done. And then when we look at that page 8 there, for the, like a real overview, we do see when we look at the current revenue total, we do see that our miscellaneous revenue has gone down 20% from last year's budget, and that, we do have some increases here, but in, at the end, you guys were able to bring up that we have, a -2% of revenue from last year. And that is something that hurts, right? When you're making less than last year. So, but through moving things around, you made that number be -2%. And then when we look at, your expenses, you know, yes, there was, an increase of an expense, but it's not that, I'm sorry, there was like on the operating budget, there was an increase of expense, but when you look at the total expenses, you guys went down 23%. So that speaks a lot to what you guys were able to do to move things around, run a leaner operation, make sure that any increase has gone to the areas that really need to have them. So when I look at this budget, looking at our economy and where inflation is and where everything is, it tells me that we are not, doing bad, we're doing really good. And I like seeing that from one year to another, that from this decrease of revenue of 2%, we decrease our expenses 23%. So that's something to just put out there.
Mine's just a general comment on, I mean, cause I know how hard it is to put together the budget. Have you guys ever thought of budgeting to the nearest hundred or nearest tenth instead of the dollar? The dollar, cause it's like, I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking how hard it would have been to put together a budget that's to the nearest dollar.
Go ahead, Will.
Every dollar counts.
Every dollar counts. The other thing is when we do our budget change process, which I introduced at the end of 2021, the BCR form makes each department head or supervisor justify every dollar increase, line item by line item. And so that's why we have the bizarre, that's why we start early. We start the process in November. It goes through all the way through January. We're looking at BCRs, making changes. And many departments managed to actually be completely flat this year, despite the inflation. We merged lines where we could, once again, to reduce costs, and we've held the line on staffing. So it doesn't get a lot leaner than this. And if Salem would do this, they wouldn't be cutting library services to the bone right now if they were able to run their ledger properly.
Just before you go, Molly, just another thing. So I don't know who out in the public was able to hear the entire budget process. So I'm gonna kind of repeat that every department came in front of us, and where there was an increase, there was a justification for it, a very thorough explanation on why that number went up. But as we look across this book, you can see that everything pretty much stayed the same. And again, everywhere where there was a change in the number, everyone here present heard it and understood and asked questions. So I want to thank everyone in the city who kind of helped us understand where changes were made, why they were made, and kind of to have this number presented to us.
Just to follow up on Ted's thought, that budget 2 years would be an awesome cost savings instead of an annual budget. If you can do that, just the amount of work that you put into it allows you to maintain control. But many of our things go longer than a year. So it'd be, I know you're thinking about it, so I'm hoping you'll get to do that.
I will say, I feel like I may have said this last year, but I feel like even better this year in the time that I've been on council, where we're at today in terms of managing our budget, and just your overall organization and presentation is truly impressive. And Will, I mean, I feel like, I know it's been a journey, but where you've gotten the ship to, just seeing your praises, and I'm super proud of you. And I think that this is by hands down the best team of department heads we've had, and just all around staff. And you can feel the customer service, you can feel You can feel the change. So I'm super proud to be here. I'm super proud that this is my city and all of you too. I think this is a really great group and Raquel, you did an awesome job too leading, so. And Stephanie as vice chair.
Open mic. Anyone else wants to make any comments or? Okay. So I would like to ask the committee if we can get a motion to approve the proposed budget for the fiscal year of 24-25 as presented.
I will. I move that we approve the budget for the 2024-2025 Newberg City budget.
Second.
Okay, so we'll now take a vote. Or is there any other discussion? So hearing no further discussion, I would like to take a vote. And for this, Rachel, do we need to do a roll call or no? Okay, so all of those in favor of approving the budget as presented, say hi or raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to approving? Hearing none, we call the budget approved as presented. Congratulations. Okay, so that's great. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Katie for a presentation on property taxes.
Okay. I don't have a full presentation. Most of you have heard the spiel before on the property tax increase. But the history again, when Newberg got rid of Newberg Fire and we split off with TVF&R, part of what happened to our assessed rate that we can take for the taxes, we kept our portion of the city and then TVF&R took $2 of that for their fire services. And then the charter allows us to increase 3% each year to eventually get back up to that maximum assessed tax rate that we used to have. So every year we ask the committee to approve that 3% rate. Will's done the math on that based on his personal property tax bill, because he's an average Newberg resident. It would be around $20.28 for the year if we did this increase. And the revenue that the city gets from this is approximately $213,298, approximately from doing the 3%. So if the committee votes no on that, we will be foregoing that revenue from the general fund on that. And also something to consider also is when we did our property tax analysis, we are losing some of our property tax revenue to the NURA. And I believe we've calculated that to be about 152,000 for next fiscal year that we're giving to NURA that we would have had in the general fund.
Can you tell me what NURA is again?
Oh, it's the Newberg Urban Renewal Agency. Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell me again where that $213,000 is allocated to go to?
Yes, so currently, right now, it's in the general fund. So it goes for our general fund operations, so it pays for police and library and planning and the municipal court services. And then right now, it's unrestricted revenue, so we can use it basically for anything, but we have it budgeted for those particular departments at the moment.
So if we were to say no, where would you take it from? Oh.
So, yes. Would you like to take that?
Within the budget, there's only really one area which is potentially discretionary. Because as you've already noticed, and thank you for recognizing the work that's been done to keep things flat. So the area where a discretionary cut could be made is the new fund that we started last year, which is the sinking fund, which we intend to use to buy off the communication tower years early. So if it were the will of the group not to do the 3% increase, the answer to that would be, from a staff perspective, we would stop doing that set aside for debt reduction. And that would balance the budget again. In other words, the budget you have in front of you would be rebalanced by not doing that.
So if we vote for this 3% increase, right now, that money really is set to go to the sinking fund that will pay off this debt by August 2026. And when we pay that off, we're gonna get like a couple dollars out of our bill. Out of our water bill. But if we don't, if we say, no, we don't want to fund this, then that $2 of our water bill is going to continue to be there, and we'll pay $2. So basically it's $2 a month that we're talking about, right? Around that, whether we pay it off or we continue to pay for however long this bill stays, this debt stays.
So if you use $2026, the year when the communication debt would be paid off early, ideally, the residential savings would be $2.75 per month. And depending upon the size of your house, the property tax might be something between $1.50 and $1.80, depending on how big your house is. So the potential savings per resident is about $1 more if we can get rid of the communications fee. So that's the calculus.
And going back to where this started, right? Because we hear, oh, they're gonna raise taxes and whatnot. However, when there was a vote to split the fire department, there was an understanding from the population that voted for it that at the time, right? Well, I remember there was a ballot about it, but there was an understanding that, okay, well, they will get these $2, and what will happen to what we pay to the city is that we are allowing them to raise this at this rate until we are back at what we're paid today, plus that $2 that is, so that's never gonna go away, but that rate is gonna increase, and legally, we are allowed to do it.
And here's a cool thing. If we're able to get rid of the debt early and we remove the line item from the bill, that line item index links up every single year. So that means that the residents will save $2.75 that year, but they would save more the year after and the year after that forever. So that line item will never come back, not as long as this staff is being this careful. So I would say that's a good deal for the homeowner.
Here I am at same question. Emily, I mean, she'd be so good at making a beautiful graphic that shows, the decision that was made tonight around this tax increase or not. And then the payoff of early debt from the communications tower. I feel like that would be a really cute, she'd be good at it, and it would be demonstrative of the decisions that we made and how much it actually ends up being, so you can see the contrast.
Yeah, and I'm being, behaving like a 5-year-old and asking questions very, so that, because I studied this and I kind of already know, but I am asking these questions and having this conversation. So for those who are watching and those, so it is informative for everyone to understand the reasons why, and have you, Will, and you, Katie, talk about it, explain. Because unfortunately, what happens is that they're, people come out and make comments about what's happening here. And sometimes it's kind of inaccurate or half true. And then it becomes like the snowball, making it seem like we're sitting here purposely to increase taxes on the residents of Newberg, and that's not the truth. So I think it's important to have a good explanation on why, and that's why in the beginning of this conversation, I'm like, let's look at page 8 and look at what we did to actually decrease things. And so anyhow, I just wanted to make sure that, you know, and I agree with you that the city can really do a very good job on explaining, you know, the whys. And
But I'll go one better. As you know, the city has developed many new income streams that are increasing right now, although the size of those increases cannot yet be known. These include, amongst many things, growing transient lodging taxes. They include new revenue from the school district for the SRO program. They include very inventive work by the police department, helping provide services to other agencies that's bringing in general fund revenue. I'm prepared to also say this. Past the 3%, and in January, if our income projections are higher than the modest ones we put in the budget, we can look to not do the 3% in the first biennium. That's the first 2-year budget. So give us a chance to show some new income in the ledger, which we've creatively come up with. We don't want to tax people because we are at our bone marrow fiscal conservatives. And so in January, we'll be able to see how well the new revenue is coming along. We'll be able to see half of the TLT year. We'll be able to see the property tax year. Most of it will be in because it comes in November and December. And then that will give us the ability to say to the committee in January that we would not need the raise for the following 2 years, because that's when we first see all of our new revenue.
yeah, I like that, you know, because as of today, we don't know what some of that revenue is, right? And hopefully we'll have lots of out-of-towners getting tickets on our new flights. Out-of-towners, I said. Pay attention. We're gonna have some traffic control. For safety, right. For safety purposes. But anyhow, so you know, is there any other discussion on the 3%? Well, 2.9852 per 1,000.
That's our rate that we'll be levying if passed.
Okay. Any further discussion? So now I'll ask for the committee for a motion to approve the taxes for 2024-2025 fiscal year of $2.9852 per 1,000 of assessed value for operating purposes.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? All right, I will now hear from all of those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we have now approved the 2.9852 of assessed value for operating purposes. And that is it. So thank you, everyone, for participating, for your questions, for taking your time to come here and meet with the staff. And I will now adjourn this meeting.